A billionaire thought he had it all until a 6-year-old black boy called him dad. What happened next shattered everything he believed. New York, 11:58 p.m. From the 81st floor of Rhodes Tower, the city lights flickered like restless stars. Julian Rhodes, CEO of the country's largest telecom empire, was still hunched over contracts. Outside, rain lashed the windows like the night had something to say. He was used to silence, to solitude, to building an empire out of deals, not people. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Julian frowned. This late, his private line was reserved for emergencies or ghosts. "This is Julian Rhodes." A small voice crackled on the other end, trembling. "Dad, is that you? Mommy's in the hospital. Please, can you come get me?" Julian froze. "I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong number." "No, it's me. My name's Zion. I'm 6. My teacher's helping me call. Mommy didn't pick me up." The boy's voice, it wasn't just scared. It carried a weight Julian couldn't name. And that name, Zion. It tore through years of silence and power like lightning through glass. Without knowing why, Julian grabbed his keys and coat. He didn't have children. He didn't believe in fate. But somehow he couldn't stop his hands from shaking. Julian's mind spun as he raced down the elevator. Zion. That name cracked something open. He didn't have children, he'd always told himself that. But suddenly another name surfaced, ghost-like Naomi. A woman with honey-brown eyes and a laugh that used to echo in his head long after she was gone. 6 years ago, Atlanta, a summer affair filled with poetry and late-night jazz. She'd vanished without goodbye like a flame snuffed out in silence. Now her name came crashing back, with a boy's voice calling him Dad. Zion had said the teacher's name, the school Greenwood Elementary. Not far. He gave the address with the clarity of a child who'd practiced it for moments like this. Moments of fear. Julian's hands were trembling on the steering wheel. His Bentley roared through the near-empty streets, slicing through midnight like a blade. All his logic screamed this was insane, a prank, a setup, but something in his chest, something buried, whispered, "Go." Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was memory. Or maybe for the first time in his life, Julian Rhodes wasn't answering as a billionaire. He was answering as something far more fragile, a man who might be someone's father. Greenwood Elementary stood quiet beneath a flickering streetlight. Julian's car rolled up to the curb like a ghost arriving at its own haunting. On a red bench near the playground sat a small black boy, no more than 6, curled up beside a Spider-Man backpack. Next to him, a young woman in a cardigan. His teacher likely kept a protective hand on his shoulder. Julian stepped out, heart hammering. The boy looked up, and Julian's world tilted. Same jawline, same deep-set, dark brown eyes. Even a tiny scar near his brow, an inherited Rhodes feature. Except one thing was different. Skin the shade of warm earth, tight curls. There was no denying it. "Dad," the boy whispered, uncertain but hopeful. Julian's knees buckled. He knelt slowly, barely able to breathe. "Hi, Zion," he murmured. And then, with a sudden burst of faith only children know, Zion rushed into Julian's arms, hugging his legs. Julian froze, then surrendered. He bent down and returned the hug, arms folding around the small, trembling body that somehow was his own flesh and blood. In that instant, everything Julian thought he knew about his life shattered, and something far more real took its place. Zion curled against his side as they sat in the nurse's office. Miss Carter, the teacher, handed Julian a sealed envelope. "She asked a neighbor to find this before the ambulance came," she said gently. "Said it would explain everything." Julian opened it. A faded photo spilled into his lap. Naomi, radiant and laughing, held a newborn in her arms. On the back, her handwriting read, "Zion Rhodes. My love. Even if he can't carry your name, he deserves to know his father." Julian felt his lungs collapse. Another paper fell out, DNA results. 99.9% match. "Paternity confirmed. She tried to contact you," Miss Carter said, "for years. But she said your corporate line always blocked her." A single name ignited fury in Julian's chest: Robert Rhodes. His father. The man who once told him no woman of color will ever stain the Rhodes legacy. Naomi hadn't left. She'd been erased. Julian rose slowly, fire in his veins. He had a son and a debt. To a woman he failed. To a child he almost lost. And to the truth buried beneath power, pride, and prejudice. That ends now. St. Mercy Hospital. 3:22 a.m. Julian stood beside the hospital bed watching Naomi. Machines hummed quietly. Oxygen hissed in a slow rhythm. Her skin was pale, lips cracked, but she was alive. A nurse handed him a folder. Leukemia, she said gently. Aggressive. She needs a bone marrow transplant. Zion is the best match. Julian nodded without hesitation. Do it, whatever it takes. Naomi's body was weakened, but her presence still stole his breath. She had once been full of laughter. Now she lay between life and death, and he hadn't even known. Zion was curled in a chair nearby, holding a stick figure drawing three people holding hands under a yellow sun. Julian stared at it, a family one he didn't know he had, one he was dangerously close to losing. He knelt beside Zion, who clutched the drawing tighter. Is Mommy going to be okay? Zion whispered. We're doing everything we can, Julian answered, voice thick with emotion. And you're helping her. You're so brave. As Zion drifted into sleep, Julian looked at Naomi's fragile frame and made a silent vow. He had spent decades chasing towers. Now, he would fight to keep one home from collapsing. Julian sat by the hospital window, hands clasped together, eyes hollow from sleepless hours. Across the room, Zion slept curled up in a chair, clutching his Spider-Man backpack like a lifeline. His tiny fingers still gripped the edge of Naomi's hospital gown, even in sleep. Julian watched them, mother and son, like someone studying a painting they once walked past too quickly. He had never wanted children, never thought of himself as a father. But something in the way Zion whispered, "Don't leave Dad," before falling asleep had cracked his heart open wider than he was ready for. Outside, the city stirred in early morning light, oblivious to the man who had spent his life conquering empires, now praying over two lives he'd almost never known. Julian reached over, pulling the blanket higher over Zion's shoulders. The boy stirred, then sighed safe. It was in that moment Julian realized he had negotiated billion-dollar deals with colder hands than this. But tonight, holding this child's trust was the heaviest, most sacred contract he had ever signed, one he couldn't afford to break. Not now, not ever again. The next morning, Julian's phone rang. Robert Rhodes, his father. Julian stared at the name on the screen for a long beat before answering. Julian came, the voice clipped and composed. I heard you're at the hospital. Is it true I found Naomi? Julian said. And my son. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was contempt. What are you planning to do? Robert's tone turned cold. Claim a child like that in public. A child like him? Julian's jaw clenched. Zion is my son, he said firmly. And he's your grandson. You have no idea what this could do to the company. To our name. Julian's voice dropped to a deadly calm. Then maybe it's time we change what our name means. Think, Julian. Think of the shareholders. Julian cut him off. I am. And I'm done protecting a brand that turns its back on blood. He hung up. For years, Julian had obeyed, bowed, deferred. But today, the boy sleeping down the hall had shown him something his father never did. That legacy isn't built in boardrooms. It's built in the quiet bravery of showing up. Julian drove through South Bronx in silence, past rusting fences and graffitied walls until he reached an old apartment building, Unit 304, Naomi's former home. He stepped inside. The hallway smelled of dust and cinnamon, faded voices of children echoing from behind closed doors. Inside her apartment, a small wooden box sat beneath a folded quilt. Julian opened it slowly. Inside were birthday cards, baby teeth in a velvet pouch, Zion's preschool art, and a stack of letters unsent, each addressed to him. Julian. I tried to call. I tried to reach you. They blocked everything. But I want you to know, he's yours. Not a mistake. He's love. The letters were inked with heartbreak. But they carried no bitterness, only hope. Naomi hadn't given up. She had loved him enough to keep believing he'd come back, even if he never did. Julian sat on the worn-out couch, holding those letters against his chest, like a man clinging to the wreckage of his own indifference. I'm here now, he whispered. I swear, I won't leave again. That night, Julian returned to the 81st floor of Rhodes Tower, not as an heir, but as a man ready to burn the past down. His legal team sat across from him, stunned by what they saw. DNA results blocked communications evidence of deliberate suppression. I want to call a board meeting, Julian said, but not to ask permission. I'm informing them change is coming. He sent 3 emails. One to Rhodes Telecom's board, one to his father, and one to Charlotte Lynn, a respected investigative journalist who had taken down titans twice his size. "What's the angle?" Charlotte asked on the call. "Truth," Julian answered, "and redemption." That night, he stared at his city through glass walls. So many nights spent believing power made him untouchable. But it was love, messy, terrifying human love, that had brought him to his knees and made him stand taller than ever before. Tomorrow the war would begin, not to destroy Rhodes Telecom, but to free it from the disease of silence. All because one 6-year-old boy made a call in the dark and said the word "dad." The next morning, Zion was prepped for the bone marrow donation. The room smelled of antiseptic and quiet bravery. Naomi sat upright in bed, pale but awake. She reached for her son as nurses gently unhooked his IV. "You sure, baby?" Zion nodded, lips trembling. "I'm strong, like you." Julian knelt beside him, placing both hands on the boy's shoulders. "You're my hero," he whispered. Zion looked up. "Will Mommy get better after this?" Julian blinked back, tears. "Yes, because of you." The nurses wheeled Zion toward the operating room. At the last moment, he turned back. "Promise you'll be here when I wake up." Julian stood tall, hand on his heart. "I'll be the first thing you see." The doors closed. Julian remained still, fists clenched, lungs burning. This wasn't a deal he could negotiate. It was a life. It was his son. And as he watched the light above the operating room turn red, he prayed for the first time in years. Not for numbers, not for fortune, but for a future where no child ever had to beg to be claimed. The silence in the waiting room was deafening. Julian paced like a caged lion, every second stretching like an hour. The doctor finally emerged, mask pulled down, eyes tired. "It went well," she said softly. Zion was brave. "We've begun the transplant." Julian's knees buckled slightly from relief. "Can I see him?" "He's resting, but he asked for you." Inside the recovery room, Zion lay wrapped in blankets, a small IV in his arm. His lips were dry, eyes fluttering open as Julian stepped close. "You stayed," the boy murmured. "Always," Julian whispered, brushing curls from Zion's forehead. "I'm never leaving again." Naomi, watching from her own bed across the room, smiled faintly. Weak but alive. She reached out and Julian took her hand. No words were needed. Blood had been shared. Truth had been revealed. And in this sterile hospital room, under the humming machines and fluorescent lights, something powerful was born, not just the reunion of a broken family, but the resurrection of a man who finally knew who he was. A father, a partner, a fighter. And this time he was fighting for something that truly mattered. The Rhodes Telecom boardroom had never seen anything like this. Julian stood at the head of the table, flanked by Elise, his lawyer, and Charlotte Lynn, the journalist, with a reputation for uncovering rot in high places. His father, Robert, sat opposite him, jaw tight, his wife silent and stone-faced beside him. Julian opened his laptop. Slide after slide of damning evidence lit up the projector. Screen wire transfers, PI reports, recorded voicemails, blocked before they ever reached him. "You erased her. And our son." Some board members gasped. Others looked away. "I've brought the truth, and I've brought a choice," Julian said. "Either we rebuild with integrity, or we watch everything burn." Robert laughed bitterly. "You'd destroy your inheritance over a fling." Julian turned the next slide. A picture of Zion asleep after the transplant. "This is my son. Not a mistake. Not a liability. A legacy." The room fell silent. Julian let it linger. He wasn't asking for power anymore. He was taking it. Tension gripped the room like a vice. Robert slammed a fist on the table. "You're bluffing." "I have 63% of the shareholders' backing," Julian replied. "Darien confirmed it this morning." "And the press," someone whispered nervously. Julian nodded toward Charlotte, who stood slowly. "If this board does not act to clean its own house," she said calmly, "the headlines tomorrow will." The room erupted in whispers. No one wanted to be caught defending racism, especially not in a company under $1 billion government contract. Robert looked at Julian, the son he'd once molded into a corporate weapon. But Julian was no longer his. "I'll go public," Julian said quietly. "You can step down with dignity, or with disgrace." Robert's jaw clenched. "Fine," he growled, "but don't expect forgiveness." "I'm not here for yours," Julian replied. "I'm here for his." He walked out without looking back. And as the glass doors closed behind him, it wasn't the sound of victory that rang in Julian's ears. It was Zion's voice echoing in his memory. You stayed. Naomi had been moved to a recovery suite. The transplant had taken. Zion sat by her bedside, painting on a large white canvas with watercolors. His brushstrokes were soft and careful, his tongue peeking out the side of his mouth in deep concentration. Julian sat nearby watching. What's it going to be, he asked gently. Our family, Zion said without looking up. So Mommy remembers. The painting showed 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright sun. One had curls like Zion's. One had long hair and brown skin. And one wore a suit holding a phone in one hand, but a heart in the other. Julian's throat tightened. He had once measured success in stock charts, in Forbes rankings. Now it was in a child's painting. In every soft breath Naomi took beside them. In the small, steady hand that had pulled him out of a life of cold marble and emptier victories. He leaned forward. When she wakes up, he said, we're going home. 3 weeks later, Julian signed the final closing papers on a house with a garden. It wasn't a penthouse. It wasn't glass and chrome. It was something better. It was theirs. Naomi stood by the gate, sunlight soft on her newly regrown curls. Zion was racing around the backyard, his laughter filling every corner. Julian walked out onto the porch with 3 glasses of fresh lemonade. This is surreal, Naomi whispered. Julian handed her the glass. It's real, and it's only the beginning. Zion ran up breathless. Can I plant tomatoes? Only if I get the first one, Julian teased. They laughed, really laughed together like something broken had found its melody again. No company logo, no press release, just dirt laughter and the sound of a woman's soft hum under a porch swing. For the first time in his life, Julian Rhodes wasn't chasing an empire. He was building something greater. A home. The knock came softly just after dusk. Julian opened the door to find Robert, his father, standing on the porch, dressed in gray, stripped of power, yet still carrying the weight of his legacy. I heard Naomi's home, he said. I'd like to meet my grandson. Julian hesitated. He could still taste the betrayal, still see Amara Naomi lying frail in a hospital bed because of the silence this man enforced. But then behind him, Zion's small voice. Who is it, Dad? Robert's eyes flicked toward the sound. He stiffened. That's him. Julian nodded. Zion, this is my father. Zion peeked from behind the door, cautious but curious. Robert crouched uncertain. Do you play chess? Zion lit up. I'm learning. The man who once denied his blood now sat cross-legged on the living room floor, showing a boy the game of kings, each move heavy with unspoken apology. Julian watched in silence, knowing this wasn't forgiveness. But maybe it was a beginning. Spring crept into their lives like a slow, forgiving song. The backyard had become a place of color and growth. Zion's tomato plants were thriving, his hands constantly covered in soil and joy. Naomi joined him in the mornings, a scarf wrapped around her head, sipping tea, as Zion explained which seeds went where. She laughed more now, freely, fully. Julian watched them from the kitchen window. His mornings, once filled with board meetings and market alerts, were now filled with pancakes, garden tools, and watercolor paintings on the fridge. He was learning to slow down, to see. One day, Zion pulled a tiny tomato from the vine and held it up like a trophy. First one's yours, Dad, he grinned. Julian took it with trembling fingers, remembering a world that once told him this boy didn't belong. Now that boy was everything. He took a bite, juice bursting with sweetness and sunlight. Perfect, he said. Zion nodded. Told you. And in that moment, the garden didn't just bloom from the earth, it bloomed in Julian's chest. Julian stepped up to the podium, the lights of the press room glaring. Behind him, a screen flashed the new logo, the Zion Rhodes Foundation for Equity and Education. Cameras clicked. He cleared his throat. For years, I thought success was about dominance, about the next acquisition, the next headline. But I was wrong. The room shifted. Reporters leaned in. Success, Julian, continued voice steady, is building something that outlives you, that lifts others. He shared Zion's story, Naomi's, the betrayal that nearly had erased their futures, and the moment he chose to stop hiding behind polished glass and start living with purpose. Starting today, 30% of Rhodes Telecom's annual profits will go to underrepresented youth. Scholarships, mentorship, real investment, not just PR. A silence fell, then a roar of applause. Some shook their heads, some wiped their eyes. But Julian, he didn't need approval. He had something stronger. Truth. That evening back at home, Zion found a package at the door. Inside was a carved chess set. From Grandpa, the note read, "For our next match." Zion placed it gently beside the one Robert had used before plastic worn. The difference between the two told a story all its own. Julian knelt beside him. "Do you want to play?" Zion shook his head. "I want to teach Mommy." Naomi laughed from the couch. "Oh, do you now?" "Yeah, you've got to learn how to castle." Julian smiled, watching them set up the board together. There were no headlines here, no quarterly reports, just a family repairing what had once been torn by fear and silence. Julian had once believed love could be bought with comfort controlled through power. But watching Zion coach Naomi through a move, giggling at her every mistake, he knew the truth. Real wealth was here, in laughter, in second chances, in love that showed up and stayed. That night, Julian tucked Zion into bed. "Dad," the boy murmured sleepily. "Yes, buddy. Do you think Mommy will be okay forever?" Julian hesitated, then leaned down. "I don't know about forever, but I know we'll face every tomorrow together." Zion smiled, already drifting into dreams. Julian turned off the light, the soft night lamp casting warm golden hues across the room. He walked down the hall, stopping by the doorway to Naomi's room. She was asleep, the steady rhythm of her breath a lullaby he never knew he needed. He sat on the edge of the bed, took her hand. For a long time he simply listened to her breath, to the quiet, to the pulse of a life he almost missed. Outside, the wind stirred the garden gently. Inside, peace bloomed where power once ruled. And for the first time in years, Julian Rhodes didn't feel like a man escaping his past. He felt like a man walking boldly into his future. Together. The morning Naomi was cleared for remission, the sun seemed to hang still in the sky. Julian had driven her to the hospital, one hand on the wheel, the other clasping hers. Zion sat in the back seat, clutching his homemade "Get Well Forever" card like a treasure. When Dr. Patel walked in, her voice calm but brimming with joy, Naomi didn't react at first. Then tears slow, stunned, silent. Julian held her face between his hands. "We made it," he whispered. "You made it." Zion jumped up on the hospital bed and wrapped his arms around both of them. Outside, a nurse paused, witnessing the hug. A family reborn not in the absence of pain, but because they survived it together. The press didn't see that moment. No articles, no headlines. But for the Rhodes family, it was the only headline that mattered. They invited Robert over. It wasn't forgiveness, it was a test. He arrived older now, quieter. Naomi welcomed him with cautious grace. Zion pulled out a chair for him like a perfect little host. Dinner was Naomi's favorite lemon rosemary chicken and mashed sweet potatoes. Robert brought dessert chess piece-shaped cookies. Zion was delighted. Conversation was slow at first. Then Naomi shared a story about Zion's school art project. Julian chimed in with one about teaching Zion to tie his shoes. And then unexpectedly, Robert shared a memory of Julian as a boy, painting stars on his ceiling because he wanted to be an astronaut. Laughter cracked the tension. The weight of years didn't vanish, but something shifted. They passed the salad. They passed forgiveness, one bite at a time. Weeks later, Julian found a letter tucked under a stack of Zion's drawings. The handwriting was unfamiliar, delicate, hesitant. It was from Naomi's mother. "I never thought you'd find her again," it began, "and I was wrong to encourage her to leave without a word. But she was scared of you, of your world." The letter continued: apology, memory, a wish to meet her grandson someday. Julian read it twice. Naomi sat beside him. "She never wrote to me," she said quietly. Julian folded the letter gently and held it out. "Maybe it's a start." She didn't say anything. But later that night, Naomi called her mother. Zion peeked in confused. "Who are you talking to?" Naomi smiled through tears. "Someone I thought I'd lost." Julian never expected to be the kind of dad who packed lunches. But here he was cutting carrot sticks into stars because Zion said they made him feel like a superhero. He never thought bedtime stories would become the best part of his day, or that learning how to braid hair Naomi's on recovery days would make him cry. He used to close multi-million-dollar deals without blinking. Now he blinked back tears watching Zion get his first Student of the Month award. The man who once ruled boardrooms now ruled the pancake griddle on Sunday mornings. And he was okay with that. Zion didn't just change his life, he rebuilt it. One moment, one mess, one miracle at a time. A year to the day after Zion made that first phone call, They stood outside the new foundation headquarters. The plaque read, "The Zion Rhodes Center for Equity, Family, and Future." Julian stepped back, holding Naomi's hand. Zion stood between them, beaming. A crowd clapped. Speeches were made. Cameras flashed. But when Julian took the mic, he didn't read a speech. He looked down at Zion. This all started with one voice. One brave little boy. One word, Dad. His voice cracked. That word changed everything. Later, they returned home. Zion placed his chessboard on the table. "Can I be white this time?" he asked, grinning. Julian chuckled. "You can be whatever you want, kiddo." Naomi lit candles as laughter echoed through the house. Legacy wasn't about empire. It was about love. And theirs was just beginning. True power lies not in wealth or influence, but in the courage to protect love, confront the past, and build a future rooted in truth. The legacy we leave is defined not by our status, but by the hearts we heal.